She was 81 years old, standing alone in the snow, with nowhere left to go. Not because she had done anything wrong, not because she had no one in this world, but because the people who were supposed to love her had simply decided she was too much trouble. And they left her there. On a dirt road outside of Harlow Creek, Montana, with a single bag at her feet and the cold pressing in from every direction, an old woman named Edna Mae Calloway stood perfectly still and watched the taillights of her son's truck disappear around the bend. She did not cry. She had already cried everything she had. She just stood there, in her best wool coat, the one she had worn to her husband's funeral 11 years ago, and she breathed in the frozen air and looked up at the sky and thought, well, this is how it ends. If you have ever felt like a burden to someone who is supposed to carry you, this story is for you. Stay with me because what happens next is going to stay in your heart for a long time. And if you love slow, warm, emotional stories like this one, make sure you subscribe before you go. We tell stories here that remind you that it is never too late to be found. Edna Mae had lived in Harlow Creek for 53 years. She had raised 3 children in a yellow house on Birch Street. She had baked pies for every church fundraiser from 1974 to 2019. She had sat with dying neighbors, rocked other people's babies, planted flowers along the fence every single spring without fail. She had been the kind of woman who showed up. Always. And then her husband Gerald passed, and her knees got bad, and her memory started slipping in small ways. The kind of ways you do not notice until someone is keeping score. And her son Dale, the middle one, the one she had always worried about, had started keeping score. He sat her down at Thanksgiving and told her she could not live alone anymore. She had agreed. She had been humble about it. She had packed her things. She moved into Dale's house in November, into the small bedroom at the back that smelled like old carpet and no sunlight. She tried to be easy. She tried not to ask for too much. She cooked when she could. She stayed out of the way. But Dale's wife, Patrice, had a voice that could cut glass, and she used it often. She forgets to turn off the stove. She wanders at night. She makes the kids uncomfortable. She is not the woman she used to be. And Dale, who had never once in his 54 years stood up to Patrice about anything, nodded along. They had talked about a home, a facility, somewhere she could be managed. But facilities cost money, and Dale did not want to spend the money. So one gray Tuesday morning in the first week of December, while the sky was heavy and the temperature had dropped to 12 degrees, Dale told Edna Mae he was taking her to look at a place. She brought her best coat. She brought the photograph of Gerald she kept on her nightstand. She brought a small bag because Dale had told her to bring a small bag just in case she wanted to stay and see how it felt. He drove her 40 minutes out of town, past the edge of everything familiar, and turned down a dirt road she had never seen before. He stopped the truck. He got out. He set her bag on the ground. He said, "I am sorry, Mama, we just cannot do it anymore." And then he got back in the truck and he drove away. Edna Mae stood there for a long time. The wind was picking up. The sky had that low, heavy look that meant snow before dark. There were no houses in sight, just fields and fence lines and the long, empty road. She picked up her bag. She started walking. She did not know where she was going. She just knew that standing still would kill her faster than moving, and Edna Mae Calloway had never been the kind of woman who gave up without at least trying. She walked for almost 20 minutes before her knees gave out. She sat down on the side of the road, on her bag, in her wool coat, and she looked at the photograph of Gerald she had tucked into her pocket, and she said, out loud, in the empty cold, "I sure hope you have been watching over me, Gerald, because I am going to need some help right about now." The snow started falling. Cole Britton had not planned to take that road. He had been out checking fence lines on the south edge of his property, the Britton Ranch, 312 acres of hard land that he had been working alone for 6 years, since his wife Clara passed and his daughter Rosie went quiet, and the world got smaller and harder all at once. He was headed home the regular way when his truck threw a belt, and he had to loop around the long way, down the old Miller Road, the one nobody used in winter. He almost did not see her. She was small against the white of the fields, sitting on the side of the road with her head down, and he might have thought she was a fence post or a pile of old feed sacks except that she moved. Just slightly. She shifted, and he saw the wool coat, and he stopped the truck so fast the tires slid in the gravel. He got out and walked toward her and crouched down. "Ma'am." She looked up at him with eyes that were calm in a way that frightened him. Not panicked, not desperate, just calm, the way people get when they have accepted something terrible. "Hello," she said. "I seem to be having a bit of a difficult afternoon." Cole looked at the bag. He looked at the empty road. He looked at the snow coming down in thick, serious flakes. He understood immediately what kind of difficult afternoon this was. He said, "Can you stand?" She said, "I am not entirely sure." He picked her up, just like that, gently, the way you carry something that matters, with one arm under her knees and one arm at her back. She weighed almost nothing. She made a small sound of surprise, not protest, and held the photograph of Gerald against her chest with both hands. He put her in the truck. He turned the heat all the way up. He put her bag in the back. He said, "My name is Cole Britton. I have a ranch about 2 miles from here. You are going to come home with me and get warm, and we are going to figure out the rest from there." She looked at him for a moment. She said, "I am Edna Mae Calloway. I was a very good neighbor for 53 years and I make an excellent pie crust, in case that is useful information." Cole almost smiled. It was the closest he had come to smiling in a long time. He said, "It might be." He drove her home. The Britton Ranch was a working place, not a pretty one. It was honest, though, clean in the way that comes from someone who takes care of things quietly, without being asked. The barn was tight. The porch was solid. The kitchen had a wood stove that Cole had going before Edna Mae had finished taking off her coat. There was a little girl standing in the doorway to the hallway, 7 years old, dark curly hair, big brown eyes that watched everything and gave away nothing. "That is Rosie," Cole said. "She does not talk much, but she is friendly." Rosie did not smile, but she did not leave either. She stood in the doorway and watched Edna Mae with those serious eyes, and Edna Mae looked back at her the way she had looked at children her whole life, with complete and unhurried attention. She said, "Well, hello, Rosie. I like your socks." Rosie looked down at her socks, which had small horses on them, and then looked back up. She did not smile, but she took one step into the kitchen. Cole made soup. It was not fancy, just canned tomato with crackers, but Edna Mae ate it like it was the finest meal she had ever had, because warmth tastes different when you have been that cold. After dinner, Cole sat across from her at the kitchen table and asked her, plainly and without pity, what had happened. She told him. All of it. Dale, Patrice, the facility that was never really a facility, the dirt road, the bag. Cole listened without interrupting. His face did not change much, but his jaw tightened, and his hands, which were resting on the table, went very still. When she was done, he said, "You will stay here until we figure out what comes next." She said, "I do not want to be a burden to anyone. I have had quite enough of being a burden." He said, "You are not a burden. You are a guest. There is a difference." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Your wife raised you right." Something moved across his face then, just briefly. He said, "She tried her best." The days that followed were quiet. Cole did not treat Edna Mae like a problem to be managed. He did not hover or fuss or speak to her in the slow, loud voice people sometimes used with older women, the voice that said, "I think you might be fragile," without ever saying it out loud. He treated her like a person. He asked her opinion on things, whether the fence on the north side needed replacing or just mending, whether the bread he baked on Sundays needed more salt, whether Rosie's cough sounded like the beginning of something or just the dry air. Edna Mae answered all of it honestly, because that was the only way she knew how to answer anything. And slowly, in the way that things grow when no one is forcing them, she began to belong there. She started making breakfast in the mornings while Cole was in the barn, not because she was told to, because she wanted to, because feeding people had always been her way of saying, "I am glad you are here." And she was glad. She found Rosie's books and started reading to her in the afternoons by the wood stove. Rosie did not say anything for the first 3 days. On the 4th day, while Edna Mae was reading a story about a girl who found a horse in the mountains, Rosie climbed up onto the couch and tucked herself against Edna Mae's side, the way small children do when they have decided someone is safe. Edna Mae did not make a fuss about it. She just adjusted the book so Rosie could see the pictures and kept reading. That evening, Cole came in from the barn and found them both asleep on the couch, Rosie's head on Edna May's shoulder, the book open across both their laps. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a long time. He had not seen Rosie lean on anyone since Clara died. He went and turned off the overhead light and left the lamp on low and went back to the barn to finish his work, because he needed somewhere to put the feeling that had just moved through him. Word got around Harlow Creek the way word always does in small towns. Someone had seen Cole's truck on Miller Road that Tuesday. Someone else had seen an old woman at the ranch. And somewhere in the chain of gossip, it reached Dale Calloway, who showed up at the Britton Ranch on a cold Saturday morning with Patrice in the passenger seat and a look on his face that he probably thought was concern. Cole met him at the fence line. He did not invite them in. Dale said his mother was confused and that she needed professional care and that they had been looking for her and were very worried. Cole looked at him for a long moment. He said, "You left her on Miller Road in 12-degree weather with a bag and drove away." Dale started to say something about how it was complicated and how Cole did not understand the situation. Cole said, "She is welcome here as long as she wants to stay. If she wants to speak to you, that will be her choice. But you will not come onto my property and tell me what she needs." Patrice made a noise from the truck. Cole did not look at the truck. He said, "I think you should go." And Dale, who had never in 54 years stood up to anyone, looked at Cole Britton and understood that this was not a conversation anymore. He went. Edna May had watched from the kitchen window. She did not go out. When Cole came back inside, she was standing at the stove with her back to the door, and he could see from the set of her shoulders that she had been holding herself very carefully together. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one on the counter beside her. He said, "You do not have to go anywhere." She said, "I know." She said it so quietly that it almost was not a sound at all. She said, "I spent so many years being needed by everyone, and then one day I was not needed anymore, and I did not know who I was without that." She stopped. "And then I came here and I realized that maybe being needed was never the whole point. Maybe the point was just to belong somewhere." Cole was quiet for a moment. He said, "Clara used to say that belonging is not something someone gives you. It is something that grows when you stay long enough in the same place." Edna May turned around. She said, "She sounds like she was a very wise woman." Cole said, "She was." There was a long pause. He said, "I have not talked about her much, since she passed." Edna May said, "You do not have to." He said, "I know, but I think I might want to." And they sat down at that kitchen table, in the pale winter light, with their coffee, and Cole talked about Clara for the first time in 6 years. About how she had laughed. About how she had named every one of the horses. About how Rosie had her eyes and her stubbornness, and the exact same way of tilting her head when she was thinking hard. Edna May listened the way she had always listened to people, like what they were saying was the most important thing in the room. January came, and with it a cold snap that pushed the temperature down to dangerous. One night, just past midnight, Edna May woke to the smell of smoke. It was not the wood stove. She got up and moved down the hallway and found the source, a cloth she had left too close to the kitchen stove before bed. Nothing catastrophic, just the beginning of something that could have been. She dealt with it, calmly. The way a woman who has managed a home for 50 years deals with things. But in doing so, she slipped on the kitchen floor and went down hard on her hip. Cole heard the sound from his bedroom and was in the kitchen in less than 30 seconds. He found her sitting on the floor, calm as ever, with one hand pressed to her hip and an expression that said she was more annoyed with herself than frightened. She said, "I am fine. I am just old and the floor is slippery." He helped her up. He checked her over the way a man checks a person he is afraid of losing, carefully, thoroughly, with hands that were gentle but did not pretend there was nothing to worry about. He made her sit down. He made her tea. She said, "Cole, I am fine." He said, "I know." But he stayed up the rest of the night. In the morning, Rosie came into the kitchen early and found Edna May at the table and came directly to her and put both small hands on Edna May's face, the way children do when they need to check that something real is still there. Edna May covered Rosie's hands with her own. She said, "I am right here, sweetheart." And Rosie, for the first time since her mother died, said something. She said, "I know." 2 words. Cole, standing in the doorway with his coffee, went very still. Edna May looked up and found his eyes, and she saw something in them that she recognized. The particular ache of a man who has been carrying a heavy thing alone for so long that he has forgotten what it feels like to set it down. She said, "She sounds like she is going to be just fine." Cole nodded. He did not trust himself to say anything else just then. Spring came the way spring always comes to Montana, slowly and then all at once. The snow pulled back from the fields. The horses got restless. Rosie started talking more, not to everyone, but to Edna May. Long, soft conversations in the afternoons that Cole could sometimes hear from the porch and did not interrupt because they sounded like something precious. The yellow house on Birch Street had been rented out by Dale. Edna May did not mind. She had stopped thinking of it as home several months ago. Home was the kitchen with the wood stove. Home was Rosie's horse socks and the sound of Cole coming in from the barn at the end of the day. Home was the photograph of Gerald on her nightstand and the knowledge that he would have liked it here. She thought he would have liked Cole very much. One evening in early April, Cole sat down next to her on the porch and said, without any preamble, because he was not a man who used many words when a few would do, "I would like you to stay, Edna May, not as a guest, as family, if that is something you would want." She looked out at the fields, at the last light going orange and gold across the grass, at Rosie running along the fence line with her arms out like a bird. She said, "Gerald always said I had a talent for finding my way home, even when I did not know I was lost." Cole said, "He sounds like a smart man." She said, "He was. I think you would have gotten along." She paused. "I would like that very much, Cole, to stay." He nodded. He did not say anything else, but he stayed there on the porch beside her as the sun went down, and neither of them went inside until the stars came out, and somewhere in the middle of that quiet, the last of Edna May Calloway's long loneliness came undone. Not with anything dramatic, just with the steady warmth of a porch and a man who had driven down an empty road on the right day and a little girl running in the last of the light. Just with belonging. Just with home. That autumn, on a Sunday afternoon, Rosie brought Edna May a drawing she had made at school. It was a house. A yellow house, but not the one on Birch Street. This one had a barn, and horses, and a porch with two people sitting on it. At the bottom, in careful crayon letters, Rosie had written, "My family." Edna May held the drawing for a long time. She said, "Rosie, this is the most beautiful thing I have ever been given." Rosie looked at her with those serious brown eyes and then, very quietly said, "You are my grandma now, if you want." Edna May pulled her close. She said, "I have wanted that for a long time, sweetheart." Cole, leaning in the doorway, looked at the two of them and felt something move through him that was not grief and was not loss and was not the dull ache of all those quiet years. It was something gentler than that, something that felt, for the first time in a long time, like the future. They say that in Harlow Creek, people still talk about the winter Edna May Calloway was left on Miller Road. They talk about it the way people talk about things that turned out to mean something, stories that start with loss and end somewhere unexpected. Someone threw away an old woman, and a cowboy carried her home. And in the carrying, something healed in all of them. Because that is the thing about being found. It does not just save the person who was lost. Sometimes it saves the person who does the finding too. If this story moved you, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments what part stayed with you the longest. Tell me where you are watching from tonight. And if you know someone who has ever felt like they were too much trouble, too old, too quiet, too forgotten, share this story with them. Because sometimes the most important thing we can do for someone is remind them that they deserve to be carried home. Subscribe if you are new here. We tell stories like this every week. Stories about belonging, about being found, about love that shows up quietly and stays. I will see you in the next one.